let's see what the leader of the free world has been up to lately. Last week, President Joe Biden did an interview on 60 Minutes, God help us, and praise be, he said the pandemic is over.
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape.
This is probably the first coherent, sensible thing old Sleepy Joe has said in years, but too bad it was upstaged by this flailing response on inflation.
Well, let's put this in perspective. Inflation rate month to month was just an inch. Hardly at all.
You're not arguing that 8.3 is good news.
No, I'm not saying it's good news, but it was 8.2 or 8.2 before. I mean, it's not. I can make it sound like all of a sudden, my God, it went to 8.2%. It's
the highest inflation rate, Mr. President, in 40 years.
I got that. But guess what we are? We're in a position where for the last several months, it hasn't spiked. It has just barely, it's been basically even.
Oh. So US families should be happy their household bills haven't suddenly become affordable because instead they've been consistently unaffordable for several months. Wow, what a win for the Biden administration. But that incompetent political spin is tame compared to this week's oopsie on gas prices.
And in 41 states, plus the District of Columbia, the average gasoline price is less than $2.99.
No, Joe. In fact, 0 states in America have an average gas price under $2.99 per gallon. Even Democrat-lovey outlet CNN fact-checked that one. As is to be expected, the rest of Biden's week was no better. Take a look at this stunning display of mental sharpness after a speech at the Global Fund's 7th Replenishment Conference.
Mr. President, thank you. At the end of such a momentous event, the word thank you seems kind of inadequate.
Gosh, what a shame he didn't have First Lady Dr. Jill there to guide him, like she had to after a speech earlier this year. But none of that was as bad as this Freudian slip at an address to the Teachers Union on Friday.
But guess what? We got a lot to do. You gotta say hi to me. We go back a long way. She was 12, I was 30, but anyway, this woman helped me get an awful lot done. Anyway.
Joe Biden proving once again why he's royally earned the nickname Creepy Joe. Now, it's been clear since the get-go that Joe Biden was never destined to dazzle as president. But did anyone ever think it could possibly get this bad? Who knows? But with the midterm elections only a few weeks away, I'm betting there are some 2020 Biden voters with buyer's remorse looking to exorcise a few other Democrats from office in 2022 before zoning in on the big guy in 2024. Joining me to discuss all of that and more is Recastled CEO and Sky News contributor Kosha Gada. Kosha, it is so lovely to have you here. Now, look, I am being very, very tough on old Sleepy Joe. You know, do you think Americans care very much about his apparent cognitive decline, or does it humanize him instead?
Hi, Daisy. Good to be with you. You know, I think it's both, and both can simultaneously be true, where on a human level, people can sympathize with this. You know, many of us have had a family member go through cognitive decline. It's a very difficult time of life. However, it is simultaneously also true that for somebody going through that, this is not the arena for them to be in. This is the most difficult job in the world, the most demanding job in the world, and the most consequential job in the world for a reason. And it is something that Americans hold candidates vying for this job up to the highest standard. And so, you know, I do think that is a big issue people care about it, and it's sort of undeniable. You know, that montage that you played, it's pretty undeniable, and you are going to see that come into play in the elections, as you mentioned.
It's very interesting. And look, obviously, the overturning of Roe v. Wade was an absolutely massive political issue earlier this year. Do you reckon it will have a big effect on the midterms, or is abortion not really a high priority issue for most Americans right now?
You know, it's pretty small. If you look at most of the metrics, polls, you know, as untrustworthy as they are, but other things too, sentiment analysis online or people calling in to their legislators and talking about what they care about, it really doesn't rank as a top issue in virtually, Daisy, every single segment, including moderate Democrats and suburban moms, which is important, but also independents, also Republicans, Hispanics that are actually shifting. That's one of the most fascinating parts of the American electorate story right now. None of them rate abortion as even a top 10 issue. The people, or the segment that do, is committed Democrats that already live in very left-leaning districts, blue states and districts, and those people are going to vote Democrat anyway, so I don't think it's going to do much. The one little area that I do think is interesting and is worth keeping an eye on is college kids who are freshly minted 18-year-olds and eligible to vote that live in purple states. A lot of college campuses are in purple districts, I should say, in swing states, whether it's Penn State or Cornell and Ithaca or Florida, Gainesville, et cetera. And those voters do really care about the abortion issue, so that's the only case where you might see the needle turn a little bit.
So do you reckon the Republicans have a better shot winning votes by angling in on law and order, or are economic issues like inflation a better focus?
Both. And I think for sure not focusing on the abortion issue, as we just talked about. Some Republicans are doing that. I think that's a mistake. They should be laser focused on law and order, which includes law and order at the border, big issue, election integrity, all of that. And the economy, specifically inflation and energy policy. We went from being an energy independent nation and just 4 years later where we are, and energy, of course, is an input into every single aspect of the economy. So those two things should remain the laser focus of Republicans, and I hope they do that because some of them are getting a little bit distracted.
Look, it always really is the bread and butter issues, isn't it, that win elections. Now, look, the Democrats, they really have done a pretty terrible job so far. And there are all these predictions that the Republicans are going to absolutely blitz the midterms. Do you think that's correct, or should we be a little bit more cautious in our thinking?
I would encourage everybody to be very, very, very cautious, cautiously optimistic perhaps, but super cautious for many reasons. You know, one is a week is a lifetime in politics. As you well know, Daisy, we're 42 days away from the election, and there are many, many twists and turns left in this story as it unfolds. Democrats are outspending Republicans to the tune of 6-1 or more in some states. They've seen some green shoots come through where there have been 4 or 5 special elections where they've actually outperformed, and a few other metrics. So, you know, I certainly wouldn't, if I were a Republican, I wouldn't want to be resting on my laurels for that. And you just never know what's going to happen with that. So I think they have to stay focused. And polls, again, we can't trust them. That's the other problem, that we're sort of flying blind. But to the extent that there's some truth or nuggets in them, they are suggesting a wave for the Republicans, but I would not take it for granted.
Now, look, this is the money question. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been making a massive splash over the last couple of years in the culture war. Do you think he would be a better nominee in 2024 than Donald Trump?
That is the money question. Look, I'm a believer in having a very healthy primary. We definitely don't want a coronation. Let everybody run, including those two, and let the Republican voter base decide. I will say, Daisy, that if Trump decides to run, and is allowed to run, by the way, because there are many efforts to prevent him from doing so on a legal basis and other tactics, if he runs, I don't think he loses to DeSantis still at this point. You know, warts and all, he's an imperfect instrument. But I just think the energy, the enthusiasm that he still commands, the metrics you look at where candidates he has backed in primaries, one after the other, have won. He's still filling out arenas and rallies to the tune of 20, 30, 50,000 attendees and more. And while DeSantis is a player, for sure, he's only 44 years old. He's got time. He's a little bit untested, I think, on global economic issues, which are very important, as we just talked about. So you put all that together, and I think it's still Trump if he runs, and that's a big if.
Khoshagata, you are absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Pleasure.